Right, good morning everyone and welcome to this meeting for Corporate Governance and Audit Committee. My name is Councillor Mahiri Francis-Meir and I'm chairing today's meeting. This meeting is being live streamed on Leeds City Council's website, and also you'll be able to find recordings of that on YouTube, and where the public are able to observe the meeting not without being present. I would now like to invite officers and members to introduce themselves, and please remember to turn off your mic when it's your go. Thank you.
Morning everyone, Jonathan Foster. So I'm Head of Internal Audit, Corporate Governance and Insurance, and I'm acting as Lead Officer today.
I'm Kate Sadler, the Council's Corporate Governance Manager.
Morning everyone, I'm Councillor Jane Dowson, Chapel Allerton Ward Councillor.
Councillor Paul Ray, Hunslet and Riverside Ward.
Councillor Jules Hesselwood, Wheatwood Ward.
Hi there, Councillor Hannah Bithell, Kirkstall Ward.
Good morning, Councillor Gore Almus from Beeston and Holbeck Ward. Thank you.
Morning, Mariana Pexton, Director of Strategy and Resources.
Morning Chair, Rebecca Roberts, Legal Officer.
Good morning, Tim Rollett from the Council's Intelligence and Policy Team.
Good morning, Leanne Cummings, Resilience and Emergencies Team Manager for Leeds City Council.
Good morning, Emma Camillo Price, Intelligence and Policy Service.
Morning, Angela Laycock, Head of Finance Internal Audit.
Hi, Kieran Dennett, Head of Procurement and Commercial Services.
Morning, Mary Hasnip, Head of Finance in Corporate Financial Management.
Morning, Victoria Bradshaw, Chief Financial Officer.
Good morning, Richard Ellis, Deputy Chief Officer, Financial Services.
Morning, Andy Nichols, Senior Manager at Grant Thornton External Audit.
Morning Chair, Gareth Mills, the Engagement Lead for Grant Thornton External Audit.
Good morning, Paminda Sethi, Grant Thornton External Audit.
Morning, Chris Horton, Grant Thornton IT External Audit.
Good morning, Linda Wild, Independent Member.
Good morning, Councillor Conrad Hartbrook, Member for Rothwell.
Good morning, Sam Firth, Member for Harewood Ward.
And Councillor Matthew Robinson, also a Member for the Harewood Ward. Good morning, I'm Debbie Oldham and I'm clerk to the committee.
Thank you very much. We're going to move to item agenda 1, please.
Thank you, Chair. So under agenda item 1, there are no appeals. Under agenda item 2, there's no exempt items. Under agenda item 3, with the permission of the Chair, items have been added to this agenda, and they are in relation to Grant Thornton, the annual report 2022-23, and Grant Thornton updated interim audit findings report 2021-22, and these will be heard as items 13 and 14. Item 4, could I ask members to disclose any interest, please? And I'll take silence as there are none. And there's no apologies, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We're going to move to the minutes now, items agenda 6 and 7. Are the minutes correct from the 25th of September? Yep. Okay, can we move them? And are there matters arising?
So no items outstanding from the last meeting.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to move to item agenda 8, annual assurance report on procurement policies and practices. Thank you very much.
Hi, thank you, Chair. So I'm, as I said before, Kieran Dennett, Head of Procurement Commercial Services, and this is the report that concerns the Council's procurement function and provides assurances that the Council's arrangements with regard to procurement are up to date, fit for purpose, effectively communicated and routinely complied with. The report follows the format of previous years, so hopefully it's pretty familiar to the committee. I'll assume that papers have been read, so I'll just touch on a couple of points if that's okay. In terms of influenceable spend in 2022, 2023, that's essentially the same as the previous year. So I think that demonstrates sort of hard work of procurement officers and colleagues in services to effectively realise savings in the context of high inflation and increasing demand for services from the last year. In terms of compliance spend, so that's compliance with our procedure rules. I think that's still very strong, and there haven't been any formal challenges with regard to procurement activity. And I think that position is also reflected in the positive responses to the survey of internal control in relation to arrangements for receiving procurement advice and in relation to contract procedure rules. But having said that, we do keep contract procedure rules under review, and we're undertaking a comprehensive review at the moment to ensure that they're user-friendly and as effective as possible. We also acknowledge that contract management best practice and embedding that across the council is still a work in progress, but that's something that we're prioritising at the moment. With regard to spend with SMEs and local suppliers that the committee's been interested in previous years, essentially in 22-23 that was more or less the same as in the preceding year, but we are looking to try and sort of push on and improve social value really across the piece. We've just recruited and are now embedding a new internal team to help deliver social value, so hopefully in the coming years we'll see that figure improve further. We do report to scrutiny each year on that, so we'll be reporting in the new year. And also the final point just to note is we've reported a few times on the work that's ongoing. It's described as procure to payment, so reviewing all those processes throughout the procurement life cycle through to contract monitoring and then through to invoicing. That's part of the core business transformation programme, and there's an update that's included in Appendix A as to progress in that respect. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from members? Councillor Firth.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for that introduction. I just want to ask on page 23.3.6, there's a mention of CPRs in relation to waivers. And I just wanted to ask, it says at the moment that there are a number that are outstanding and yet to come onto the system. And obviously we've made significant progress in terms of driving down the number of waivers every year. Could I just ask what the process is to put them online? And is it just a normal that this delay is in place, or is there something that's stopping it from keeping up to date? Thank you.
Thank you. So the waivers themselves, the information that we've got with regard to the 23 waivers is taken from the council's decision register. So they're all already online in the sense that they're on, they're publicly published on that decision register. There is an obligation on officers to publish information in relation to all their contracts valued above £10,000 on the council's e-tendering platform, which is your Tender 3 platform. So it's that element that hasn't yet been done in relation to 6 of those contracts. The services haven't put the information on our e-tendering platform yet. So that's something that we're chasing up with officers within the services. Does that answer that question?
Well, thank you for that reply. The reason I'm asking that question is just simply for transparency to ask in terms of we have made significant progress, which has been a bugbear, I believe, of the committee previously. And I just wanted to ask how we're monitoring that progress, because ultimately we want to make sure that we're actually not having any further problems in the future.
Yeah, I'd be happy to provide you with information that sort of shows over the last few years the progress that has been made with regard to the numbers that are decreasing, and I'm happy to report over the coming weeks. As I say, we are chasing with regard to those 6 contracts that haven't yet gone onto our e-tendering platform. We're in touch with the services to make sure that they do that promptly, so I'd be happy to feedback if that's helpful.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bithell, and then on to Councillor Ray.
Thank you. In section 3.5, it talks about waivers.
to the CPRs. I wonder, now that we're putting EDI and social value stuff in, whether they are exempt from being allowed to be part of the waiver. Otherwise, that feels like a way that could kind of quite easily be dismissed if necessary. And then also around the contract management, it talks about the difficulties around it, understanding of the procurement policies around contract management. I guess there's two sides to that. If you could just elaborate a little bit more. I realise the points below do some of that, but I wondered if there was anything you wanted to add. And then also, do we believe that the contract management stuff that we have in place effectively holds those that we do contracts with to account? And could you explain why we don't put more in, why there aren't larger consequences for not meeting the requirements of a contract? Thank you.
Yeah, so in terms of EDI considerations, as part of any waiver decision, that ought to be being taken into account and should be factored into the decision that's taken by the relevant chief officer. And in terms of waivers of CPRs, that they're only permitted in exceptional circumstances as well. So hopefully those controls are in place in that respect. With regard to contract management, the position within the council has been, up until relatively recently, in fact it still is, that services are responsible for having their own contract management arrangements in place that are effective to manage the contracts that they're responsible for. Services are responsible for sort of their budgets and their service provision. So we haven't really taken a centralized corporate approach to managing to contract management. Where we've got to recently, though, is sort of accepting that isn't an ideal position, and actually that services need some further support to enable that. We did a bit of research and a few surveys, and actually, in some instances, chief officers weren't even aware that they were responsible for contract management within their areas. And in terms of the numbers of contract managers, we've got over 400 people who are responsible for managing contracts across the council. And what we certainly didn't have previously was a community of contract management across the council. We didn't have a formal set of training that was available, and we didn't have support. So that's what we're trying to put in place at the moment. We're not trying to take over contract management sort of centrally, but we are trying to make sure that individuals who are perhaps responsible for delivering a service area, so they've got technical skills within that service, to make sure that they've also got the technical skills when it comes to contract management to go alongside those. So that's what we're trying to do corporately. With regard to whether we hold providers and suppliers to account, I think there's two aspects to that. Is we think that the process that we've got in place with regard to procurement and putting in place the contract, we think is pretty strong, and we think we've got the rights and remedies within our contracts to allow us to hold suppliers to account for underperformance or poor performance. But it then comes back to the secondary. Are we actually applying that in practice? Do the individuals who are responsible for those contracts, do they have the skills and do they have the capability to be able to do that? Do they have the capacity as well, I suppose, in some instances, to be able to do that? And that's the thing that we're trying to correct. Is that okay?
Yeah, thank you. Just one further question that links back. I guess the initial question was around the contract management once they're there, but I wonder, do we believe that the services, based on what you've just said, also have the skills to negotiate the procurement and the contracts in the first place?
Yeah, so with regard to the higher value contracts, so that's everything above £100,000, we do provide that corporate support to services to help them to be able to do that. But yeah, I mean, talking as openly as possible. I think the issue is that we get to that point where we've awarded the contract, we've done a lot of hand-holding and provided that support to make sure that what we've got in place at that point in time is really good and is fit for purpose. But then it kind of that support kind of then falls off a cliff edge. And so what we want to do is to be able to do, you know, to provide that continuing hand-holding to make sure that the contract management arrangements going forward are appropriate and fit for purpose.
Thank you. Councillor Ray.
Thank you for this. And just looking around 5.10 and the table really that sits below it and some of the priorities. So user-friendly processes, the go to growth review and simplification of the CPRs. At the moment, how many of our low value contracts are going to local suppliers within either Leeds or the West Yorkshire region? What is the intended KPI in terms of targets to improve from where it is to how that's going to happen? And what are the actual meaningful metrics that are intended to be used to monitor that? Because I think one of the big issues is it's all well and good of simplifying the tendering process for smaller suppliers, but a lot of small suppliers have no idea that they can apply for tenders to the council. So what's going to be the corporate communication strategy towards that sector, as well as just improving how it operates, and what's the forward plan for that, please?
Okay, so in terms of the query about the spend on low value contracts, I don't have that broken out from the overall spend with local suppliers across the whole of the council contracts. So I'll get that information for you and provide it to committee after this, if that's okay. With regard to KPIs when it comes to spend with local suppliers, currently the KPI is looking for year-on-year increases, so that's why I was sort of referring back to last year and saying it's flat. We haven't really increased. In fact, we've gone down marginally. So we're sort of working to try and you know, I suppose push forward so that we are seeing those year-on-year increases. And then in terms of how we can sort of better liaise with that sector, we've engaged with Go for Growth, who are an organisation, a local organisation, to help us to look at our contract procedure rules and to help us to look at our processes in place to facilitate organisation, well, to make the processes more fit for purpose and more user friendly when it comes to low value procurements. So that's internally. But the reason why one of the reasons why we ended up engaging with Go for Growth is because they already work with local suppliers in different areas. So I think they've done a lot of work with colleagues in Bradford to engage with their local suppliers. So we think that they've got sort of a unique perspective on being able to help us review our internal process, because that's their bread and butter. That's what they do. They work with suppliers to try and help them to understand how they can contract with local authorities and how they can access local authorities. So we're trying to make sure that our processes that we've got in place do facilitate that. And what we intend to do, we haven't sort of quite got to the full details and workings out, but once we've got our processes sorted out internally, we do intend to do that liaison with the market to make sure that you know, SMEs within our area are aware of the opportunities to be able to register and apply for contracts with the council.
So I think it'd be very useful going forward that actually as part of these reports, we have a breakdown of how much is going properly in terms of value to the low procurement. It's a key objective of corporately of this council to make sure that we're spending more money within the local economy and we get that circulation. So having that information is not only good, but it's also good for us to understand actually the sustainability of our own local economy. So that would be good to have through. I think we need more information on how you're going to communicate. It's all well and good saying someone's got expertise, but if they're basically going to be promoting our contracts, we need to have assurance that corporately we're comfortable with that approach. And just to say actually they've got some expertise isn't really good enough. So I think you need to provide us with some form of briefing as to exactly what that expertise is, how they intend to engage with our small companies and also third sector partners, and how that aligns with our corporate objectives and missions as a council, so that we can have that proper oversight as a governance committee to make sure that we feel that's happening in the way it should be doing. Just telling us is not the same as us understanding, and if we don't understand, we can't do our job. So we need more information, please.
Okay, no problem.
Thank you, Marianne.
Yeah, just to add, when we get to the stage of the communications, I think what we'd be looking to do is, use our economic services colleagues and make sure that we use connections to the Chamber and Federation of Small Businesses, those kind of routes that are already there, and to make sure that we, ensure we use what we can out there rather than necessarily all our own direct communications, and that we're coherent when we're engaging with businesses.
Very appreciate that, but there are much larger networks than just that, and not all of the small companies or third sector organizations in this city are connected to those organizations. So we need some reassurance that we're just not casting the net out to the same old networks. And actually, we may need to look at some of our ABCD partners, our third sector partners, Central Forum, etc., and actually make sure that we're casting that net out properly, because there's no point in having a objective and actually we're just speaking to the same old people because we're using the same old comms channels. So that's why I'm saying we need to have a much better understanding of how you're going to break the mold and come outside of the box, as it were.
Thank you. Councillor Robinson.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, and pleasure to see a plethora of officers here. It leads me to think, if you're all here, who's doing the adding up? But I've got some questions on social value, if that's okay. So within there, you mentioned, within the report on 3.11, you mention expenditure with local suppliers and SMEs. There's a standard definition of SMEs. How do we define local suppliers?
So local suppliers is Leeds and the West Yorkshire region.
So as somebody who works for one of those organisations that Mariana was just mentioning, that's there. So are we suggesting then that you have to have an office here, that your staff are based here? In an age where people work from home, staff are based everywhere now. Many of the council's officers will work for Leeds City Council but won't be based in Leeds. So just kind of get under the bonnet of it a little bit.
Yeah, we use the address that the organisation has invoiced us from. So there will be some sort of national organisations, but if it's the local branch or the local office that has invoiced us for the particular supply of particular goods or what have you, they will then be defined as a local supplier.
Sorry, Chair, you.
Sorry, I think that's more of a scrutiny question. Is that?
Well, in following up then to that, which I think is hugely enlightening and for taking to scrutiny, I would ask then, how do we show to those who are contracting with the council what good social value and basic social value looks like? Are there examples?
So we do have, as part of each procurement for over £100,000, so the higher value processes, we require social value to be considered in respect of all our procurement activity, but in particular with regard to the higher value procurement activity, we do include social value requirements that are specific to the particular contract, and we also allow opportunity for suppliers or providers to come back with their own proposals about how they can deliver additional social value that are in accordance with specific themes, outcomes and measures that we've defined for Leeds City Council.
Kate, would you like to come in?
Just to say, Chair, it's my understanding that there's a report going to Scrutiny Board in the early new year dealing with procurement with social value, and it seems that rather than duplicate effort between the two committees, it would be appropriate to hand this issue on to scrutiny to delve fully into it, rather than skate across the surface here and there and have that duplication of effort.
To aid me then, in asking questions this morning, where does this committee end and that one begin then?
Yeah.
If parking's up at 12, you just tell me. Yes.
So the broad line is this committee is systems and processes. Scrutiny is policy and outcomes.
That helps.
Thank you.
I can do you a slideshow if you'd like.
I'll live without that.
Right, thank you, Councillor Firth. Last question on this.
Thank you. Well, I'll avoid the scrutiny question. You mentioned earlier very kindly the procure to pay review, and it's currently underway to improve capabilities across the piece. Could you just clarify, is that an ongoing review that happens throughout the year, or is there an expected end date for that? And also, in terms of how we're going to be able to scrutinise that, when is it going to be completed to be able to come back to either this committee or the other scrutiny committee?
So the P2P review is one aspect of the overall core business transformation program. So it is ongoing. I suppose by way of background, colleagues from the LGA facilitated a peer review of procurement back in 2021, and they came up with a series of recommendations. So that's essentially what the that table that is in the Appendix A at paragraph 5.10 is building on those recommendations. We came up with a series of actions that come from those. We've also sort of, since that time, so that's a couple of years ago, we've engaged with DLUC and colleagues at local partnerships to look at, for example, contract management and how we might improve contract management within the council. So we've been building on that original set of recommendations that came through from the LGA peer review, and it's continually evolving in terms of the actions and the steps that we're taking. As we complete actions, they sort of leave the action plan, and as we develop our thinking and develop different priorities, they sort of go on to it. So I've tried to set out some sort of high level dates there. I suppose key points to factor in are, one of the big things that we're looking for is to review how we can utilize technology to make things more efficient and more effective. We have a case for change that has been developed, but we need to look at the sort of the really what are the sort of the cost or cash benefits of us bringing in a new system that goes above and beyond what our current system is. So we're looking to have that business case developed early in the new year, and then there'd be a procurement process for bringing a new system in. But that's likely to be probably another sort of 18 months or so by the time you've done the procurement and you've got the new system embedded. So it's not an annual thing, but it is something that I do report on annually to provide updates to this committee.
Okay, thank you very much. Are we happy? Is the committee happy with the recommendations set out in the report? Sorry. Oh, sorry, Linda. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Mine's a very quick question, and really, I suppose, is culminating in all of what I've heard this morning. Paragraph 3.1 talks about the survey of internal control and some findings from that. I'm quite keen to hear how the results of that principle 4 in the graph on page 22 compares to previous years. I'm assuming this is run every year, and if so, what? I don't know if I should be concerned that around 50% is of colleagues feel that they're well embedded at their knowledge. What is your action to improve that well embedded? The fairly and the not to bring you more into the green, if you will.
Yeah, I think the questions this year were slightly different from the previous year. I think the position with regard, I'm pretty sure there was something the year before about contract management. I think the position has improved from the preceding year, but I think that's another one way if I can sort of dig out what's from the previous year and send you that through to the whole committee so you can see that. But like I say, I think the questions were slightly different. But to take your sort of fundamental question about, you know, what are we doing to improve that position and make sure there's more green than there currently is. So with regard to the arrangements for obtaining procurement and commercial advice, and with regard to the final bit, which is about the contract procedure rules, I've talked before about that piece of work that's ongoing about trying to make sure that they're more user friendly, more accessible, so that anybody can pick up those contract procedure rules that we've got in place and understand them. And we've got some guidance that we're going to wrap around that allows them to be able to actually put those rules into practice. And that's the initial piece of work that we're hoping to, or we're anticipating should be complete by the end of this financial year. What we want to follow that up with then is an app that colleagues within services are able to use so that they answer a series of questions with regard to their procurement and what they're trying to procure. And then that provides them with a suite of documents that enables them to go forward. So to make that, to make use of technology to really push that on. With regard to contract management, I think there's two aspects to it really. One is the contract management of the contracts that we've currently got in place, and making sure that making sure that officers in services have got the skills and capabilities to be able to do that. And it's what we've done so far is bring together that community of contract managers. We think we've got a fairly good handle on understanding of who does contract management within the council. We provide a quarterly newsletter to them, updating them on opportunities to improve their contract management knowledge. We've liaised with chief officers to try and make sure that within people's appraisals who are undertaking contract management, that's addressed as part of their appraisals, and if there's any learning or development needs, that's being picked up. And we've got centralized resource now to try and help and support with that knowledge and learning. But the second part of it is, as I mentioned before, to make sure that we're providing this support with regard to procurement activity, but that support doesn't just drop off a cliff edge once the contract's awarded, and actually that we've got people there who are able to make sure that the service has got a contract management plan in place, and that we're keeping a review of that. And it might be that for certain contracts, key contracts, that we're reviewing, say for example, on a quarterly basis and having those touch points more frequently. For other contracts, that we will prioritize them. For other contracts, it might be an annual review that we pick up with the services. So yeah, is that enough on that?
Yeah, thank you. I think I would be interested to see just how, I know the questions might be subtly different, but it'd be quite nice to see what the trends are, to see whether all the efforts that you're putting in is actually having an effect. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is the committee happy with the recommendations that are set out in the report? Yeah, to move it? Okay, thank you. So we're moving on to item agenda 9, annual assurance report with Emma. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good morning, everyone. Emma Camillo-Price from the Council's Intelligence and Policy team. I'll take you through a summary of this report on our corporate performance management arrangements, particularly any changes to reports that we've previously brought to this board. So the format and the content are substantially the same as previous reports that we've brought to this board in terms of the processes for collating and for reporting the performance information, and for the boards that we report that data to. The substantial changes this time relate to the KPIs, our key performance indicators themselves that we report. Prior to the introduction of the Best City Ambition, we had the Best Council Plan, which set out the strategic ambitions of the council, and we had a set of indicators that stemmed from that document and which we reported against. Now, the Best Council Plan, of course, related to how we performed as a council, whereas the Best City Ambition is a wider ambition that includes partnership working across the city. And last year was something of a transitional year for us in terms of performance reporting, as we looked at how best we could report the council's performance within the context of the wider monitoring framework of the Best City Ambition. So progress against the Best City Ambition will be monitored, including wider partnership working and citywide intelligence, and it will include the following elements which I have set out in this report: the Joint Strategic Assessment, Social Progress Index, and indicators within our key strategies. The performance framework for the council's performance monitoring is to be focused on a single list of indicators that is going to be reported in the same frequency to that which we previously reported. So that information goes to the corporate leadership team quarterly, to executive board annually in our annual performance report, and to the relevant scrutiny boards twice yearly in January and June. So they will receive those indicators that are the subject of their remit. Now, in intelligence and policy, we have been working with colleagues in other directorates who carry out performance reporting functions and with services themselves to review and refine the list of indicators that we report. We're particularly mindful that these be directly related to the council's own performance, rather than that wider city intelligence that will help inform progress under the Best City Ambition. Our performance framework is within the context of the ambition, but it is a distinct process. This work is ongoing with services, and the list of indicators is also being reviewed with scrutiny chairs. We're mindful that there were new chairs to the boards this year, and whilst we had previously engaged with the previous chairs, we've been engaging with all scrutiny chairs as well. One additional element I did want to mention is the introduction for the Office of Local Government OFLOG, which is introducing a set of indicators that will be reported for all local authorities. We received an initial list of indicators under 4 service areas, and those were finance, adult social care, adult skills and waste. And since then, further areas and indicators have been added with more to come. So we are still in the process of reviewing those with services. Some are identical to those we already report, some are additional, and we will be building those indicators into our performance framework as OFLOG develops. And we're also in correspondence with them directly around any queries or clarifications needed. So those are the key points I wanted to raise in the report. Obviously happy to take any questions on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emma. Councillor Bithell and then Councillor.
Thank you. As always, I've got a few, if that's okay. How do we ensure the performance management of external providers? I know you've just said that we want to keep it separate and it just be the council's sort of business, but a lot of our contractors are the face of the council to our residents. And I guess it links to the last report in terms of that contract management stuff and also the performance of and how that impacts our KPIs, I guess. If you could give us an idea of how this all links to sort of the personal performance management of, is there a link between the sort of the corporate performance management and then that embedding itself into the personal performance management of officers to then make improvements? If an organisation or a part of the organisation was to get, I don't know, 6 KPIs that were out of their however many that were low, do we have a corporate prioritisation method of what would be actioned first? And if so, I think it'd be really helpful for us to see that if that exists, or if you can talk us through it, that would be great too. It talks about the well embedded again at the end of the report, and it talks about 93% are pretty positive, but to say the words that have been used in the survey of well embedded versus fairly embedded, actually fairly embedded, I'm not convinced that is actually a positive. That sort of just sounds like, well, they know that it exists and sort of do it sometimes. So I wonder if 93% positive might have been a little strong. And then I realise this makes me a broken record, but I just wanted to once again think about how we are, if it's point 41, it says in line with council values, the review of performance at CLT and directorate management team levels encourages a culture of openness and honesty and continuous improvement rather than one of blame. And I wondered if you could highlight how that's done, and also once again make a plea for a therapeutic approach to HR and utilising those therapeutic approaches in terms of how we challenge people in a way that is really healthy emotionally, in and amongst what looks like a really positive culture that's being created. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. I'll try and take those points in turn. So first, regarding performance around external providers. So our high-level list of indicators doesn't specifically cover those kind of contract management performance indicators. There may be some elements that we do have in our list. For example, I know that we report on repairs, so Leeds Building Services will be included in that, yeah, of course. But beyond that, we sort of don't get involved within the sort of more detail of specific contract performance management. So I hope that answers that point. And then in terms of your next point around corporate performance compared with personal performance, and I think if I understand correctly what you're saying, we're looking at those sort of corporate indicators versus those that directly relate to individuals that work for the council. So we do have indicators that cover that, and they're things like appraisal completion, sickness, health and safety. And those are indicators that fall within strategy and resources, so they would go to the strategy and resources scrutiny board as well. So I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, sorry. No, I think I just wasn't clear. Sorry about that. What I was meaning was we get the KPIs which the teams and the services then are expected to act on. Do we have a means for those to inform what appraisal targets, and not necessarily are they doing the appraisal targets, but does it, I'm basically looking for that flow through of when we realise something's not up to scratch at a sort of higher level, do we then embed that right down through officers in order to make the improvements at the ground, so the KPI will then change?
Okay, I think I understand, Councillor. So I would expect that where we have key performance indicators relating to particular services, that's something that will be looked at in conjunction with appraisals. I obviously couldn't give specifics for every area. I can go on to talk, I think part of this may cover one of your later queries about how we approach and prioritise any issues and how we look at that at CLT. In fact, I'll go straight on to that now. So when we come to reporting to the corporate leadership team, we obviously have quite a long list of our key performance indicators, and myself and colleagues within the intelligence and policy team and colleagues who carry out that function within other directorates as well, we will look at those key performance indicators and we will identify key items for CLT. So we'll be looking at things like whether there's anything particularly relevant that quarter. We would be looking at anything that may appear to be going in the wrong direction, and we would highlight a few key points for CLT so that they can then have meaningful discussions around those indicators, and we would expect obviously see some change in those each time we report, but it would be those key items for CLT to have that discussion about. If you're happy for me to, I'll go on to touch on what I think was your last point, which was regarding the survey. Now, just looking at that myself, I can go back and look at the previous year. I think, as mentioned in relation to procurement, I think questions may have changed slightly, but I do take that point. And what I would expect to see, given that the work we are doing at the minute with services and that we're having this quite wide-ranging review with a lot of services, I would hope to see some improvement in those figures, given that we're having those discussions now. Obviously, time would tell on that one, but given those discussions that we're having with the services, with scrutiny chairs as well, I would expect those responses to show that more people agree that those arrangements are well embedded. I think that was all your points, Councillor.
Thank you very much. Marianne, would you like to come in?
Yeah, just to add to what's been said already, I would echo with what's been said about the kind of external providers, contract management, that would happen at a much more local level where appropriate, and does link, as you said, to the what Kieran suggested. In terms of the personal performance management, again, just adding to what Emma's mentioned, it is a complex golden thread, but we do aim to have a golden thread right the way from the top to the bottom and the bottom to the top. And the way that works is through, directors' objectives that Tom sets, with the leader having his appraisal with Tom's appraisal, feeds through into chief officers, through, etc. Uses the kind of the framework. And then, often at a very local level, you'll have team plans that pick up those KPIs that have been discussed here and that would be discussed in scrutiny board, and they would feature then in appraisals. The extent to which that's done and the way that's done, that the appraisal, we have a framework for appraisals, as you know, but it potentially will be picked up differently in different areas, quite rightly, given that we are running a whole load of different sets of services. Again, just to add to what's been said around kind of when there's a failure, those things are highlighted for CLT. Tom would pick those up in direct appraisals, for example. They would get picked up through scrutiny and in other conversations. And then maybe just to add on the last point you made about open and honest rather than blaming, that is a definite challenge. We've had the conversations about values, and we've had papers here and at scrutiny on HR and managing performance, and how you do that in a kind of high support, high challenge way. So that, yes, we do challenge, but we make sure as well that colleagues are supported and do have the tools to do their best, etc. I couldn't say to you that we do it in a more technically therapeutic way, because we've talked here before and at scrutiny about, we've got 2,200 managers, which is a lot, to make sure that everybody can, do that in an appropriate way. But nevertheless, we do have that Be Your Best programme to provide support to managers for how they manage individuals. And as you know from the staff survey, we get a fair bit of positive feedback about how people are managed, as well as, understandably, sometimes some cases where things aren't managed perfectly. Hope that just adds in to what Emma's mentioned.
Thank you very much. Councillor Firth.
Thank you very much, Chair. And further to some of the questions that have been asked already, I want to just go into a bit more detail about the granular detail about how we analyse, also at the same time being sure we stick on the side of this committee and not scrutiny. I want to mention about benchmarking to start off with, and then also the customer contact centre. It makes clear in the report that benchmarking is encouraged by each directorate to be able to show how they're fulfilling their KPIs. Now, given that the word is encouraged rather than it's expected that is placed, can you just confirm how that process is undertaken and how they're actually reviewed in terms of making sure that we are getting the best detail and results to analyse whether they're actually benchmarking themselves properly against external or other authorities? And the second question is in relation to point 76, which is in relation to seeing the contact centre as a barometer for the problems the public is experiencing with council services and taking remedial action. Could you just confirm the reporting process for issues from the contact centre, and more importantly, how that may even feed into the benchmarking process to see how we're performing and how we're actually dealing with issues at hand? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So in relation to benchmarking first then, so we do provide that analysis in our performance reporting wherever possible, including other core cities as well as regional and national averages, to provide that meaningful analysis and comparison of our results. Now that does vary depending on the indicator. We do work with directorates to get that information to feed through into our report to the corporate leadership team. So we'll provide that benchmarking. In some cases, that may be specific figures we can provide. In other cases, it may be more of a narrative explanation around benchmarking. I think most services that we work with, benchmarking is well established in their services. So this information is something they're able to readily provide for us. In scrutiny board reports, that information is provided as well, and where possible we go back and look at previous years' figures as well. In relation to your point around the contact centres, I think that's kind of twofold in that we have key performance indicators that relate to the contact centre around calls answered. But in addition to that, as part of our process of reporting through to the corporate leadership team, we do meet with the contact centre to discuss any key issues that are arising at that particular point. So we would feed that information into our report to the corporate leadership team as well. I hope that answers your questions, Councillor.
No, thank you for that. The reason I was asking was because there was a mention of feedback and escalation mechanisms, which are understandable, but ultimately I just wanted to see whether we could get that sorted. And just to add to Linda's point on the previous report, I was going to say for every single one of the reports going forward, that it would be helpful to have a comparison to previous years. So I hope that's duly noted. But thank you anyway.
Councillor Robinson.
Thanks, Chair. Emma, just following on the answer you gave there, you mentioned about things varying depending on the indicators. Obviously, Oflog is designed to try and create some sort of uniformity that's there. How often do we have to submit data to Oflog, and could we submit it, or do we collect it more frequently than that if needed?
Thank you, Councillor. Details are still being worked up. My understanding is that it would be an annual report to Oflog. Now, depending on the indicators, some of those may be annual indicators, so we only have that data once a year anyway. It may be that for others we have it more frequently, perhaps quarterly or even monthly. So it may be that we're collating that already. As I touched on in my brief summary, some of the indicators that Oflog are bringing up, they're ones we already report, or we report around that service, but perhaps in a slightly different way. I'm sure there will be additional ones that we don't report currently to CLT, but are being reported within the service. So there's quite a lot to unpick there, and we are working with the services to do that. But my understanding is it would be annual.
Just to come in very quickly on the survey of internal control question that you asked there. So obviously this is quite a new thing for us, and my colleague Kate introduced this just a year or two ago. So the first one was done, and then we started to evolve the questions a little bit and reflect on those in the second year. So that's why we don't necessarily have the comparative data at this point year on year. However, we are at the point now at looking at how we go about that in the future years, whether we do a deeper dive and more thematic survey in certain areas, or the value of the year-on-year comparator. So certainly we'll reflect on the comments of members in this meeting when we come to that, but just to address that one, because I get that that can come up repeatedly.
Thank you, Chair, and I think that's a good point. When the data sources change, the needs of how you analyse those data sources and track them change. So, you know, related to the Oflog question, then obviously once a year, in my view, because I don't want to stray into policy, is not adequate in how Oflog would attempt to do that. Would Leeds be in a position where, if we wished to, because of how we collect data, we could have dashboards that were updated on a monthly basis that were open for the public domain that were there? Do we have those systems in place to allow us to do that if we chose to?
Thank you, Councillor. Considering that we are building the indicators coming from Oflog into our reporting, we would expect to include those in the list. So certainly it would make sense to me. I believe the intention would be that where that information is available more frequently, we will be collating that as it comes through. It will become part of our process for reporting to corporate leadership team and scrutiny. So of course, where we had more updated information, that would feed through those avenues. In terms of the actual processes for holding that data and how that could be shared, processes like that are something we're looking at the minute. It's probably going to be a bit longer term as we look at things like the potential for sharing data for automation, things like that. It is something that our team is looking at, but I couldn't at this point in time give you any further information on what that could look like.
Thank you, Marianne.
Yeah, just to add in quickly, a couple of things on all those questions. Just in terms of customer contact, just to reassure you, there is a report for December's scrutiny board on customer contact performance, which has followed, you know, recent conversations here. Obviously, the Oflog, you know, we are awaiting. There's a lot of, you know, kind of early information, speculation, etc. But we'll, await that information. The other point I feel is important that I do just mention in relation to contract management and this report, and potentially the risk report, is that what we're always doing, and obviously with the support of this committee particularly, is to make sure our arrangements are proportionate. They are appropriate and proportionate. And we do need to note that there are fewer people in the organisation doing this stuff than there have been historically. And as we head to next year, there will be fewer people again. So our drive constantly is how can we make sure we don't compromise what we're doing? Absolutely, we still have really, really good governance, strong measures in place, etc. But we need to do that with fewer people. So it's just important to have that into the conversation, because we get a lot of feedback, as you know, from, staff survey about workload pressures. A lot of the nagging that we do on all of these things, including contract management, risk, performance, colleagues would say to me that, you're nagging and you are causing me pressure. So what we're always trying to do is make sure we've got the arrangements in place that, satisfy and do provide really good governance, but, without making sure that making sure they're not too excessive in terms of that pressure. Sorry, Chair, but I feel it's important to have that conversation live in the room.
Thank you very much. Also, just to mention, the HR assurance report is due in March as well. So I'm going to leave it and close that item there. Is everyone happy with the recommendations made out in the report? Yeah. Okay, we're going to move on to item 10 for the assurance report for corporate risk and resilience. Thank you.
Good morning, Tim Rollich from Intelligence and Policy Service. This is our annual report on risk and resilience, and it covers two key areas. The first is risk management, and that's the area that I will lead on and provide some high-level points. And the second aspect is what we call resilience, which covers emergency planning and business continuity management. And my colleague Leanne will be answering the questions on that side of the report, and will also provide a couple of highlights onto the report as well. In order to make this more digestible, we've split risk and resilience into two separate cycles of internal controls. That might make it easier to read those details. But the reality is some of the controls and measures in place are cross-cutting, not least the fact that Leanne and myself regularly liaise on this to share best practice and information. In terms of the risk management side, our arrangements are broadly similar to those of previous years, but you'll notice from the report that we've made a number of enhancements, which I'll quickly talk over. We still have those three main tiers of risks within the organisation: corporate, directorate, and operational. And those risks are, certainly in terms of corporate and directorate, reviewed every quarter, reported through the respective directorate management team, and then onto corporate leadership team for that open and honest discussion. We work extensively with stakeholders, both internal and external, and that's seen through a number of the boards and committees that we sit on, including West Yorkshire Prepared. But we also, as you'll see from the report, have really had an increase in demand for delivering risk training and risk workshops across council services and functions. And I think that kind of reflects the fact that we're now in this post-pandemic world where there's a lot of new challenges, and services want to sort of check in with us on what their risks are and whether there's any new risks that they need to be thinking about. So we help facilitate that process. You'll notice from the report that a major piece of work that or a really useful piece of work that we've led on this year is a comparison across the risks on other core cities' strategic risk registers. And last Thursday, we had a coming together virtually of risk management leads from the core cities. There was a real appetite for getting something like that up and running again, and we were able to look at what we want to cover in those meetings going forwards, because there's an appetite for sharing best practice, lessons learned, etc. What are the current risks that we're all having to deal with? And so that core cities risk review exercise was really useful from that point of view. A couple of other things to mention. We still engage in active horizon scanning, both internally and externally, and that involves, like I say, meeting with other people, both internal and external. in terms of lessons learned, that was one of the recommendations from the internal audit reports. And although we did lessons learned, it was kind of informal and we didn't really properly document that. So one of the things that we've introduced is evidence of where we've looked around and seen internally and externally what lessons learned are. So it's been a really busy year for risk management. I'll quickly hand over to Leanne for highlights from the resilience side of things.
Thanks, Tim. So Appendix 2 covers much of the same as last year as we continue to operate without very many amendments to our working practices. Our level of engagement remains positive with directorate groups reporting on emergency planning and business continuity issues and items. And we're fully embedded with the local resilience forum, with Mariana now being one of the three co-chairs of the forum, and we're represented at all meetings, training and exercising too. Last year, we recommended that we wanted to review the emergency planning and business continuity policy. So we've now concluded the review of that policy and it's now been approved and available on our website. It's titled Resilience, Emergency Planning and Business Continuity. So in this report, I've included a bit more detail on our communications method, as warning and informing is a duty under the Civil Contingencies Act. We have a social media account on X, formerly known as Twitter. That's used to advise followers of imminent threats, such as weather warnings or road closures from police-led incidents. And we also push out through X messages on the number of awareness-raising campaigns, such as the water safety campaign that we ran in the summer in conjunction with the Fire and Rescue Service. We also maintain our Leeds alert system, which is a text and email cascade system, and that's aimed at Leeds businesses. And we would issue much the same warnings that we put out on X on Leeds alert, but businesses can build these communication methods into their business continuity plans. New for 2023 was an air quality alert system. So we issue out warnings to Leeds workforce, public and those that are vulnerable to high levels of pollution in Leeds. And we manage this alert system on behalf of colleagues in public health. So they pulled the distribution list together and manage people signing up to that system. And we issue the warnings if there is a warning at the trigger level requiring one. We've had this year another busy programme of training and exercising with the local resilience forum, and that's had the focus remaining on national power outage, but also the recovery from a national power outage incident too. And the LRF still have the draft plan for national power outage as a work in progress, as do Leeds. New to this year, we developed a training package to roll out to newly appointed police inspectors with West Yorkshire Police, and that was a focus on police bronze commander level and the support that the council can offer during emergency incidents. And we had a heavy emphasis on communications, the importance of clear and concise communications, both on the lead up and response to an incident. You asked for more members training last year, and you'll be pleased to know that we delivered a member induction session back in May. And we've also developed a generic workshop type training with an element of tabletop exercising. And we've delivered that on 2 occasions this autumn and been asked to deliver 2 further sessions that will be delivered in January. As a result of the success of those trainings, we've also been asked to attend the Community Committee Chairs Forum to discuss the topic of building community resilience in a bit more depth. We've also delivered a live exercise on reception centres, so how to establish a reception centre for those who are evacuated from their homes. So we had a series of classroom-based sessions that were delivered to our pool of volunteers and sports staff, and those are staff that help in staffing a centre if they are activated. And then we had this live exercise which provided an extension to that learning in a role play based environment.
This live exercise also contributed to Leeds City Council being awarded with a Gold Paw Print Award from the RSPCA for our ability to look after companion animals, which was a great achievement. Last year, we also reported our desire to resurrect the Leeds Business Continuity Network, which last met before COVID. And we relaunched this after 6 months of planning on the 9th of November. The event had a focus on Martin's Law, which was really well timed as it appeared in the King's speech only a couple of days before our event. So we had guest speakers from counter-terrorist policing and the First Direct Arena, and also within Highways, Leeds City Council and community safety teams. It was a fantastic event, sell-out event, and we plan to have that as a biannual event going forward. And following from that network, we are planning another event in the new year, which will invite businesses to come and attend, and through interactive learning workshops, create their first draft of what their plan will be when Martin's Law comes into effect. So last year we reported that business continuity training was required, and we also advised that Leeds City Council's internal audit section were doing a full review of business continuity management. So this audit has been finalised. It was finalised in October, and it did highlight some weaknesses. Fortunately, we had already identified those weaknesses and made some changes in our practices prior to the report being finalised. One of those items was business continuity awareness and training. So we're in the midst of an internal review process with all 84 of those business continuity plans, assessing their content against ISO 22301, which is the standard for business continuity, and assessing our confidence in their ability to offer robust mitigation measures. So this process is also identifying any areas of heavy dependency, so which we will then ensure those services that do have that heavy dependency on them include those areas in their business continuity plan, so how they will provide that service to those other services relying on them. If we have any business continuity plans that have a low level confidence in them, then we plan to deliver a series of workshops to those services to increase their awareness and knowledge on the importance of robust business continuity planning. And we'll work with them moving forward to refine their plans. So just to conclude, we do continue to meet our legislative duties under the Civil Contingencies Act, as outlined as well in the new Resilience, Emergency Planning and Business Continuity Policy. We've built on a number of areas identified for improvement and have strived to embed those through awareness training with key officers. And we're working on ensuring that business continuity management has, we've got robust planning around that, which we feel will be an extensive process, and we will plan on updating you next year. Any questions?
Linda. Thank you, Chair. I have a question on risk management, if I may, please. So I've been dipping into the corporate risk map. I appreciated it says that September 2023, I think, in the exec papers. And thinking ahead to one of the Grant Thornton papers that's on the agenda that talks about the financial position of the council and the actions and efforts that's going to have to put into place to be within our budget. What, if any, impact on risk will that have? And you might not have the answer to that straight away. I appreciate that's a very big question. I suppose what I'm asking is, what arrangements have you got in place to ensure that the financial impact concerns risk, if you will, what effect is that having on the other corporate risks of the organisation? And with that in mind, I'm mindful that the scoring of the risk is a current score, isn't it, after controls? I'd be quite keen to see or hear from yourselves how that compares to the gross risk scoring, and what is the control arena looking like, bearing in mind that we may have to take more risk in other areas going forward, and we need to be mindful of what that gap is. And then my final point is, what is our appetite? What is Leeds City Council's appetite for risk in each of those areas that's listed in the exec report? And what are we prepared to tolerate? Because I think there's going to be some conversations required around risk more generally, but particularly in some specific areas when we look at the financial climate going forward. Sorry, that's a very big question.
No, those are all interesting questions, and I think they're the questions that are being asked across local authorities across the country. In terms of the risk map and what the effect of finance on other risks is, well, obviously, as the amount of budget that we have is being challenged and is shrinking, that could be a source of other risks from arising. So, obviously, staffing is one of the biggest areas of spend on risk. And if we've got less staff to manage risks, for example, the safeguarding risks, that could have an impact. And those risks are already red anyway. So when the service reviews take place, looking at how the council workforce is structured, a reduced budget would obviously be a source of those risks from occurring. And that is part of a wider suite of financial management reports that go to executive board and corporate leadership team regularly. So there's quite a lot of detail that goes into that, and the financial risks are picked out at a lower level anyway within those reports. In terms of risk ratings, you mentioned gross risk. Well, I think that's called inherent risk, and that's where the risk starts out before any controls are introduced. So we look at where the risk is right now, but that's got a forward-thinking view to it over the foreseeable future. So again, if none of our risks had any controls in place, they would all be in the red corner. But when we make that decision as to where the risk is, the current risk rating, that's kind of looking ahead anyway and thinking, well, actually, with the budget that we've got over the next year and the resources, how likely is this risk to happen and how probable if it does happen? And then obviously anything that's in the red is prioritised for treatment. But as you look at our risk map, in common with a lot of other core cities, our risks are in that top right-hand corner. And it's that challenge to use the available budget to manage those risks to that acceptable level. In terms of risk appetite, that's a really interesting question, because as a council, we have to take risks. We can't be totally risk averse. And in theory, it's quite easy to say, well, actually, if a risk is in the red corner, that's not acceptable to us and we need to manage it down. But as we've seen with the resource challenge, that's hard to do. And also with a number of our risks, you only have to have a one slip and it could cause a fairly significant risk to arise. The easiest example of that is cyber, where somebody could click on a malware link and it could bring the system to a halt temporarily. So for some risks, no matter what we do, they will always be rated as high. And so the challenge really is to work out the risk appetite is what we will tolerate. And what we're doing at the moment with the cyber risk is we're doing a detailed piece of work to map out, in conjunction with IDS, what specific aspects of that risk in this post-pandemic world will we be willing to take, but what is completely unacceptable. And again, it's quite simplistic to say that anything that is illegal, we will not, that's not within our appetite. But as you can appreciate, as we start to unpick this a bit more, there are some grey areas where what is tolerable and what isn't. And so, for example, staff training, we require all new members of staff to have mandatory training on information management and governance, but how quickly do they need that training as soon as they start using the council system? So that's one of the sort of the slightly grey areas around risk appetite. But generally, you know, we have to take risk, but it's how well we can manage and control it. So quite a long answer there, but I hope it picks up what you were looking for there, Linda.
Thank you. Victoria, would you like to? Sorry, Lynn.
So I'll just come in a little bit more about the financial risks. Obviously, finances hit all parts of the organisation. So therefore, as financial resources are reduced, that does, as Tim said, affect all parts. What we do is make sure that we've got a robust strategy in place. In that strategy, we recognise what those risks are and unknowns. So we've highlighted those within the strategy. We then have been forecasting where we are as an organisation. And as part of that, we've been identifying those areas that are at higher risk. And we monitor those throughout the year. So once we've done the savings proposals to reduce the cost base of the council, each of those proposals are robustly reviewed and challenged by officers and members. But we have a specific officer group that goes through from all different parts of the organisation to make sure that we're picking up things like the HR implications, the legal implications, the asset implications, etc. And they feed into those proposals, and then we do RAG rate them. So we identify which we feel that can be implemented quite quickly or have already been implemented, or those where they're amber, so need some work, but we feel that the risk around them is medium, and those that are higher risk, and we monitor those robustly. And we monitor all that and report it through to executive board. What I would say is where there is a requirement for additional resources to help implement some of those proposals, we've set up the transformation teams, and this is linked to the recommendations that are coming in the future reports. And we have teams wrapped around those so that we help support the implementation. And we're identifying areas where they might not be on target, or there are risks around the delivery of those very early, so that we can put corrective action in as soon as we can. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. That's very helpful. I think just going back, to the comments around trends and looking at how things move over time, I wonder if it might be helpful for the committee, just something to think about, whether we want to see the trend on risks and the movement on risks, and what that what the financial impact perhaps is having on those. Might be quite good for us to see that. And then I think going forward for the internal audit plan, and I'm sure they probably already do this, but it'd be quite good for us to, as a committee, to see what those risks are looking like trend wise and what impact that's having on the internal audit plan, so we can have some independent assurance that they're all being reported and managed. Not saying that they're not, but just so we've got that independent assurance to take from the internal audit plan on that. Thank you.
Right. Are there any further questions? Councillor Bithell.
Thank you. My questions are mostly around the emergency plan exercises. How do we utilise these to preempt EDI issues? So when COVID happened, obviously it impacted different parts of our population more strongly than others. And do we engage with any elements of community in order to achieve that? And I've been trying to work out a way to ask this question without sounding a little extreme, and I haven't found one, so I apologise for that in the meantime. But I guess, how do we protect the council's resilience while on exercise days, in the sense of the reporting around things like September 11th? One of the main problems was that the military were on these sort of exercise days, and then the thing they were exercising about happened, and then the response was slower because of it, because it was easy exercise, is it not? So I guess, how do we make sure that when we're on an exercise day, there be a national power outage, that we are quick to respond? And then I guess the other question is around IDS. We've also previously identified a lot of concern around risk with IDS, so I'm glad it features in here. And I was just wondering whether you could update us on roughly when we're likely to know the information that's stated in the report, and therefore when we'll be, because obviously it talks about you guys getting an update, and then when we'd be able to be assured that the IDS's risk is mitigated effectively. And if I can just also ask, based on a previous response around IDS, you talked about legality, and I think it might be my lack of understanding, but I was a bit confused as to what grey area there is around us an IDS being legal. But yeah, that might very much be my confusion. Thank you. Thanks for your questions, Councillor. I'm going to take the last two first, if that's all right. So during exercises, we have code words built into the scripting. So if we used a certain code word, that would be exercise stop, that there would be that there is a real incident that needs responding to, and that's in all exercises. The last question that you had around IDS, sorry, you had two questions on IDS. The first one, on their major incident plan and when we're going to do that reporting, we're meeting on the 18th of December to look at all of the critical services plans and produce a report as a team on the feedback on all of those plans, which will then contribute to some feedback that we give to IDS on their incident response plans, and that will be fed back in the new year to all of those services, and then they will obviously build their recommendations that they have been made in those reports into their next update of their business continuity plans, which are due in April. So if they've got any issues around those, then we'll pick them up in directorate resilience meetings before then.
Shall I come in and try and add a little bit in there? So in terms of preempting EDI issues, I mean, obviously that's quite a big question because we face loads of different risks. So, you know, it might not be necessarily around protected characteristics, but things like flooding, for example, it would be those communities that are most at risk. Things like terror, it would be those communities that are most at risk. A lot of the broader stuff in terms of thinking about EDI would more just be through organisational culture and the fact that people increasingly are, you know, kind of have EDI considerations, I think, more at the top of their mind, you know, particularly on the back of the training. But I think, you know, we've had those values so explicit for such a long time that I'd like to think that, you know, those considerations are there and are live. And in particular, I think we do look to that community engagement and resilience being everybody's responsibility. So that might be, you know, particularly include members, for example, you know, to make sure that we do kind of stay on track on that. And if we're not, then, you know, people will tell us. In terms of, I think the answer probably answered the on exercise days question, you know, well, in terms of how you kind of opt out of that. I didn't know whether you were also asking a broader question there, just about, you know, the impact of those things on colleagues. And I think if you were, I think that does take us into the broader, you know, the wellbeing offer that we have and making sure that colleagues are aware of that wellbeing offer, particularly if they face something in the workplace that is a challenge. Again, Anne's answered the point about the IDS and the risk, but just to mention, the IDS assurance report is due for February, the February meeting of this meeting. And you know, I'm aware that, you know, you've mentioned about attendance here from colleagues, and you know, there are quite a few issues. So I'm trying to work with colleagues on that early on to make sure that, you know, we're as proactive as that. And I'm not sure I fully understood the last one, but I thought Tim might.
Yes.
That's it. So in order to clarify that last point, we do not have the appetite for doing things that are illegal. So compliance with the GDPR, for example, that was articulated as a risk at directorate level. And obviously there's a corporate risk on information management and governance that picks up wider issues around that. But there are these sort of grey areas where it prompts a bit more thinking. And a good example of that is unsupported systems. So, for example, we saw the WannaCry attack in the NHS several years ago, and that came in because they had a large proportion of systems that didn't have the most recent patch or upgrade. And so there are some systems where, you know, how much do we spend to get the most recent upgrade? But also systems might be going out of contract. And so we need to make sure that when those systems are replaced, we can replace them as quickly as possible so that there isn't that overlap of having a lack of support from the software provider. But again, that will be covered in the IDS report that is due next year.
Sorry, do you want to come back?
Yeah, just another small point on community resilience. So the training that we did with members recently, when we we're touching on the topic of building community resilience, and the work that we're planning to do through community committees would be asking members of the community to come together to write community resilience plans. So this is the extra piece of work that we're going to be doing with those community committees, and then going through all of those community committees to develop these robust plannings that are on a very local level. So who are those vulnerable people that are in the community? Do we need to develop, a door knocking system with, certain streets or communities? Can we identify village halls and other very local level buildings as reception centres that build on the robustness of our higher response plans, with the sports facilities and whatever that we've got as reception centres? But there's smaller incidents that happen in a community, and ensuring that robust on the ground before we have a bigger incident, and just being aware of other things that they can do to build that community resilience. Having grab bags at home, having an ice card, or a screensaver on your mobile phone. What are you allergic to? If you're allergic to medication, who are you? Who's your next of kin? So all of those very resilient messages going out on a very local level. And that's the plan for next year.
Okay, thank you very much. Are we happy as the committee happy to receive the report and support with the assurances for the next annual governance statement? Yeah. Okay, thank you. We're going to move on to item 11, which is the financial planning and management arrangements, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is the annual report on the standing arrangements for both financial management and treasury management. And the report also fulfills the requirements of the Chief Financial Officer's protocol, which is part of the Council's constitution, to report on those arrangements to this committee on an annual basis. Given the financial challenge that the authority currently faces both in the current year and future years as outlined in the medium-term financial strategy, it's essential that Council has appropriate financial management and treasury management arrangements. In terms of the report itself, much of it is similar to previous years in terms of it describes the democratic and officer oversight of the arrangements. It also describes the finance framework with regard to the constitution, and it also details the key documents that we use for reporting and also our key processes as well. It also references the CITFA statement on the role of the Chief Financial Officer from the statement that came out in 2016, and provides detail in terms of how the Council and the arrangements we have in place are consistent with the requirements of the CITFA statement. What we'll just focus on is just some of the changes really from the report we brought 12 months ago. The first one relates to offlog, which Emma's already referenced. There were a couple of items on there with regard to the level of reserves and also the level of debt held by the authority. Those particular performance indicators have been referenced before and have been part of CITFA's Financial Resilience Index now, and that came out in 2018. So there's nothing new there. Obviously, it's just changed reporting requirements. There's an update with regard to the replacement of FMS in terms of Microsoft Dynamics will be implemented during the new financial year 2024-25. In terms of independent scrutiny, it picks up the key findings from Grant Thornton's 2021-22 VFM review, although clearly that'll be superseded by the 2022-23, which is a later agenda item on this report, on this agenda, sorry. And it also just provides the outcome of the latest internal control survey, which references that there are good arrangements in place within financial management and treasury management. So the report concludes that having undertaken the review of the system of internal control for both financial management and treasury management, is that the Chief Financial Officer for Financial Services is satisfied the arrangements are up to date and are fit for purpose, and that we meet the requirements of the Constitution. Thank you, Chair. And if anyone's got any questions, I'm happy to try and respond to them. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Councillor Firth.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Richard. I just wanted to ask one particular point, which I know that the graphs keep coming up on our minds. Point 155, results of the survey on internal control. And only 58% of those respondents said that financial regulations, including those in relation to security of physical assets and stocks and stores, said that it was well embedded. Now, I just wanted to ask, what, in terms of the survey of control, how many respondents are we actually talking about? Are we talking about everybody across every directorate? And what has been done since then to ensure that we can improve then? Or what systems are in place to ensure that we can deal with that?
If I can take that in terms of the survey of internal control, I can't give you numbers, but I can tell you how we approached it. So we basically went to the top 3 tiers of management, so directors, chief officers, heads of service, and asked everyone across the council who was in those 3 categories. And this year we got nigh on 100%. I think it was something like 97% return rate, which is absolutely phenomenal on any survey. So we've got a clear picture right the way across the council there.
And in terms of the stocks and stores, the reference down to on page 127, just in terms of opportunities for improvement, it references the requirement to review the sort of key control processes, which would include the sort of management of our assets and portable assets. And the intention is to tie that in with the implementation of the new financial system, is to revise them and strengthen those arrangements so they'll be communicated out as part of a training package, and we'll make sure in respect to that stocks and stores is a feature of that as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. The nature of also looking at point 125, which is on a separate point, obviously our colleagues from Grant Thornton are here and we will come on to discuss their report in due course. But it says the Chief Financial Services Officer meets with Grant Thornton on a monthly basis to review progress on the delivery of a balanced budget position, etc., etc. And I just wanted to ask that, given the nature that the report that has come here from Grant Thornton says that the current expected overspend when it comes to looked after children is £900,000 higher than what was previously projected the month previously. Can I just ask, in terms of the process going forward, is it going to be made sure that that's reported back as soon as possible to senior leadership, and how is that taking place in terms of ensuring that if there is any further increases, we are fully aware and abreast of the situation?
Okay, thank you, Chair. Just to make sure I've got your question correct, is this around the in-year financial position?
Yes, because of the nature that from report to report, I can see here, there's been an increase from £900,000 in the projection of the overspend. And obviously then we need to have robust systems in place to ensure we are on top of it. And I appreciate, just want to know a little bit more meat on the bone.
Okay, so we report to Executive Board on a monthly basis on the financial position, and as part of that, each of the heads of finance meet with the directorates and go through their financial position. Those are then collated together and discussed. We have an internal meeting, we go to CLT, and then we go to Executive Board. Then that then is discussed at scrutiny committees around the financial position. So we monitor it on that basis. Where we identify that there are high risk areas, which obviously we have, we've then put in a task and finish group and an oversight board and a members oversight board to review that position and the actions that are being taken. I have met with Grant Thornton to update them on the position for this year and for future years, and gone through with them the actions that we're taking to manage that position. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Are we happy as a committee that the appropriate system and procedures are in place for sound financial management across the authority, and that the arrangements for the chief finance officer protocol has been complied with? Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. We're going to move on to item 12 with Grant Thornton. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So the report presents Grant Thornton's IT audit report, which is in support of their 22-23 audit work. So I'll hand over to Grant Thornton to present the report. And after that, I'd like, if I may, to add a few highlights in respect of officers' response to the first recommendation. Thank you.
Of course, Mary.
Good morning. The IT audit report for the council highlights are there's an improvement since last year. Quite a lot has been remediated since last year. And what we're finding is where we identify issues, those issues are taken as positive and there's work done to remediate them. If you actually look at the report, there is one red finding in there. That one red finding doesn't have a material effect on the accounts, and there are mitigating procedures in place. Still needs to be fixed. That finding was identified in the previous year, which was presented to the committee in March earlier this year. So there hasn't been time to remediate that by the time we come and performed our work. For 24-25, I believe there is a new process that will be in place. Has anybody got any questions, or would you like me to go through the issues that were discovered?
If you'd like to go through the issues, that'd be great. Thank you.
So the first issue.
Sorry, can I just ask Mary? I think Mary wanted to.
Sorry for the confusion there. Yes, I just wanted to expand a little on the officer's response to that red finding, as obviously it's concerning on the face of it. Grant Thornton's point is that in principle, they feel that a systems administration role shouldn't be held by the same people who hold other active roles in managing a system. Obviously, in practice, the extent of the risks that cause will depend on the exact functionality of the system that you're talking about. So by comparison, obviously, we refer to the fact that we're introducing a new ledger system, Dynamics. We're at the early stages of looking at the user setup arrangements for that, but it's already clear that there will need to be a different division of duties when we introduce that system, because the functionality of that system is quite different from FMS. As regards FMS itself, the nature of the system is that a lot of the fundamental controls are actually hardwired into the system and couldn't be bypassed by the system administration roles. Since the last audit report, IT audit report, was presented, we have improved the user access setup security arrangements in the system. That was a potential issue that could have affected user setup, whoever was actually doing that user setup, rather than the fact it was specific to finance users doing that role. But obviously, with the report being presented again by Grant Thornton, we have looked carefully at the findings. We've looked at the functionality, and we remain satisfied that we believe there are no additional significant risks as a result of the user administration being carried out by finance staff rather than by other staff.
So based on Mary's response there, I'm happy to take any questions, or would you like me to go further?
Yeah, that's fine. Are there any questions from the committee? No. Linda?
Just a quick one, thank you. You know that the issue doesn't cause any material impact on the accounts. Conscious that materiality is very high, and that's not the only consideration, is it, from a user access perspective? So are there any other risks? So, for example, fraud risks in relation to the inappropriate user access? And if there are, how have you addressed that?
If I could perhaps answer this. So as part of our work, as part of the audit process, we look at other areas, for example, journals, and we review the people that actually do post some of those postings that are relevant, just to satisfy ourselves that there hasn't been anything untoward. And as part of that testing, obviously, if there were, we would report that back. And to date, based upon the work we've done, there hasn't been anything that's been identified as being unusual. So that's the way we obtain our assurance in that regard for 21-22.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any further questions? No, we're happy with the recommendation set out. Okay, thank you. We're going to move on to item agenda 13. Again, Grant Thornton.
Thanks very much, Chair, and I'll take this paper. So this is our 22-23 annual auditor's report on the VFM element of our audit work. The work was delivered by my colleague Andy Nichols to my right. Andy's part of our national VFM team, delivering a number of VFM reviews, and his background previously was delivering a number of VFM reviews for the NAO. This particular report is the third year that we've reviewed value for money arrangements under the NAO's revised code, so it goes much wider than the previous value for money level of audit work that external auditors performed. We look at the arrangements in place, Chair, across three particular themes: so financial sustainability, governance, and arrangements for economy, efficiency, effectiveness, or the 3 E's, or if you like, your performance management and outcomes. On page 9 of the supplementary pack, there's a summary of our findings in the table, which show we've raised 2 key recommendations this year, Chair, which are in essence elevating previously reported points, and I'll come on to those in a moment. And in common with previous years, there are a number of improvement recommendations raised as well. Just turning over the page onto page 10, that's tried to summarise, I guess, the financial position of the council and some of the challenges that has already been touched on in this particular committee previously, Chair, which has led to the key recommendation, which I'll come on to in a moment. And page 11 again summarises their findings on governance arrangements and on the 3 E's. So turning to page 13 of the pack, headed up per section 3, this is our first key recommendation, Chair. And as I say, it builds on ones that we've raised in the past around the council's financial position. So I think in the context of a number of factors, Chair, we believe it's right to elevate this matter to a key recommendation for 22-23. So one is an area that this committee has previously discussed quite a bit, which is around the relatively low level of usable reserves that this council holds compared to other comparable organisations. Then factoring in, I guess, the challenging position nationally that this council, along with a number of other local authorities, find themselves in terms of demand-led services, levels of government funding linked to that. The position is not going to get any easier from my reading of the autumn statement last week in terms of local government, perhaps not being to the top of the list, if you like, Chair, for any additional spend that the government may have, or indeed whichever government is in place towards the end of next year. You've then got the overspends from the last 2 years offset against reserves and the projected overspend for the current year, and the level of borrowing and servicing of that borrowing that this council has. So all those things combined, Chair, in our view, do support elevating this particular issue to a key recommendation. The council's clearly aware of all that. Victoria, as CFO, very clear in terms of what the council needs to do in relation to that particular challenging environment. And indeed, there's a significant amount of work ongoing in that particular area as we speak, in order to continue the sustainability of the council going forward. And indeed, that's summarised in the management comments on page 13. The second area where we've raised a key recommendation, Chair, is just over the page on page 14. So this is in terms of the engagement and approach to the accounts audit, where again in previous years we've raised improvement recommendations in that area. And given that the 21-22 accounts audit remains ongoing at present, we were hoping obviously to conclude in September, and indeed again for this committee, both sides are trying to do all they can to get it concluded this side of Christmas, but there is a risk against that as well, Chair, which will then push back the 22-23 set of accounts into the following year. And again, I think off the back of that, we think it's appropriate to elevate that particular recommendation to a key recommendation. Clearly, the council's ledger, as we've previously discussed, Chair, isn't helpful or conducive to that modern audit approach, and we're aware obviously that that will be changing in the near future. That should help with that process going forward. So the rest of the report summarises 7 improvement recommendations across those particular themes. It's a detailed report, I appreciate, Chair, so I'll take it as read that members and colleagues have read it. So I'll pause at that point to see if you or other members have any questions, and myself, Andy and Perminda will endeavour to try and answer them. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much. Victoria?
Thank you, Chair. I would say that of the 2 key recommendations that have been been highlighted, the council's done a lot of work around those recommendations. We have recognised for a number of years now around the level of reserves for the council, and we have been improving those over the period of the medium-term financial strategy. And the thing with the level of reserves is that you can't just build them overnight. They need to be built in a sustainable way over a number of years. Otherwise, you would be putting services at risk for the residents of Leeds. So what we have been doing is taking a very managed approach of increasing those steadily over the last few years. Even through the pandemic and through a cost of living crisis, we've still committed to increasing those. Obviously, there are, as Gareth said, Grant Thornton have said, around the national position and the pressures that a lot of local authorities are experiencing. As part of that, we have built those demand and demography pressures into the budget going forward. We have seen an unprecedented time where social care costs have increased, especially in children's services, and we've built that into the budget. And we've also got robust plans on how we're going to manage the budget, and that the proposal is that there will be a provisional budget going to Executive Board in December as a balanced position for the authority. And that is one of the things that is the strength at Leeds, is that we do have clear and robust plans that will be in place and delivering those plans. In regard to the level of borrowing, that needs to be taken into the context of the size of the asset base of the council. We have a huge asset base, and therefore you have to maintain and manage those assets and invest in them in the future. What I would say is that the servicing of that debt, when you compare us against other local authorities, is medium to low. And that shows the treasury management function and how well that function is undertakes the level of borrowing for the council and is managed. We have fixed in over a number of years, which has put us in a good position now going forward. On the second recommendation, what I would say is that there have been improvements, despite that we know that that the new system is on the horizon. There has been a lot of work by the team around the working papers, how to improve those, how to make sure that we get validation checks on those, And there were recommendations for both sides, both for Grant Thornton and for the team around how we work better together. I would say that we've had a number of challenges because we've had hot reviews, we've had dealing with sometimes 3 audits at once, and we're trying to close the accounts, and we've recognised that and put extra resources in to manage that, especially as we're starting to put the new system in. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any further questions? Councillor Firth.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. Thank you to Victoria for that. And also it is appreciated the difficult financial circumstances. So it's also appreciated the in-depth analysis provided by colleagues from Grant Thornton. I just wanted to ask about in Appendix A and B, the risk of valuation of land and buildings. I appreciate there's been a robust discussion between both Grant Thornton and the council in relation to their valuation date. I just wanted to ask, how does that compare, given that we value at the 1st of January and it's been recommended that we on the 31st of March, but at the same time Grant Thornton have to an extent accepted from those discussions, understandably, why the council is still valuing it on the 1st of January, given the volatility of accounts in the run up to the end of financial year. How does that compare to other local authorities? And is there any way in which that recommendation has come forward in comparison to others elsewhere and are able to provide that information? Thank you.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Councillor Firth. I think that's slightly jumped to the next agenda item, which I think is the ISA 260 report, but I'm happy to answer it now as part of this discussion if you're happy with that, Chair. So in terms of the valuation date of 1st of January, I mean, that has been brought forward by Leeds and indeed by a number of other local authorities off the back of previous discussions with us as external auditors. And it does help to reduce the level of audit queries, clearly, because we're 9 months ahead of where previously the valuation date was 1st of April, when if you go back 3 or 4 years, there was a heck of a lot of work required, Councillor Firth, to get to a position where we were materially assured that the 31st of March valuation was still accurate, if roughly 20 to 30% of assets had been valued at the beginning of April at the start of the financial year, and then there was a whole host of assets that may not have been valued in year at all. I think this council, with most others, have now moved to a better process in terms of valuations of assets that are closer to the year end. I would say your valuation date of 1st of January is probably where the majority of my clients are. There are some that have moved the valuation date to 31st of March, so it completely aligns with the balance sheet date, which again makes the finance team's job and our job much easier, because the valuation date is, as I say, right at the balance sheet date. But I do know both here and at some of the larger authorities the difficulties that valuers have said in order to provide a valuation date of that of 31st of March and still provide Mary with the relevant information to pull her accounts together.
No, thank you for that. I think the main reason that I think that, given that we're in a financial situation as we are, that ultimately we're actually paying some of that through removing some of those assets and selling them on, that ultimately having that up to date look at it is appreciated. But I do also appreciate the further meat on the bone that you've given there about other authorities. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Firth, and thanks, Chair. So if I can just come back on that, yes, you're absolutely right that this authority, as indeed a number are looking at now, around the level of assets held, and is that appropriate in the current environment, and potential asset sales. From an accounting point of view, Councillor Firth, when assets get to that stage where there's an expectation of a sale within the next 12 months, they're actually transferred into a different area of the balance sheet called assets held for sale, which are valued on a slightly different basis, Councillor Firth. But it's a really good point that that's indeed one of the issues we're actually discussing with finance colleagues at the moment on the 21-22 set of accounts, around some discussions around particular assets that may or may not be in that asset held for sale category, and if so, are they valued appropriately? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Are there any other further questions? Are there any further questions? Right, Councillor Robinson.
Thanks, Chair. I'll be brief. in the Grant Thornton report, page 23, the first recommendation, on the first bullet point, it talks about optimism bias that's in there in terms of the savings made. Is the suggestion been that we try and look at a broader suite of numbers when we're looking at this to say actually that the optimism bias would be the top end, but we reckon could be a saving at the bottom end, and try and be clearer in that sense? And how do you then go about reporting that in a financial paper? Because you've got to make the numbers add up at the bottom. There'll be a lot of wriggle room in there.
Yeah, thanks. A great question. I think optimism bias is a well-established concept in project and program planning, and all projects and programs, and indeed in human nature, is we're subject to it to a degree. I think ultimately, in the case of council savings programs, one often sees delivery in the kind of 60 to 80% range as the sort of outturn, and really, given that the ideal is to move to as accurate forecasting as possible, as early as possible, the accounting for optimism bias would take into account what you actually expect to happen, as opposed to, and to identify whether that central case is indeed a central case, or whether it's a best case scenario. So I think it's about having a range of scenarios, and identifying what you would do in each of those. But essentially, it is, without going to a long and technical exploration of optimism bias, it's about building in an outside, what would you as an objective observer expect to happen based on past performance, as opposed to kind of, continually walking up to a target and then missing it by a bit, and then continually doing the same the next year. So I think there's a number of ways you could report it, but, robust scenario planning is something that we often put forward as a way of addressing that.
Thank you. Do you want to?
Thank you, Chair. Interesting to just highlight the comments we made in response, really, in terms of what the council currently does with regard to its projections. So in terms of those areas that are quite fluid in terms of, say, demand, is that it's an iterative process. I can't say, let me see, is that we do model different scenarios, sensitivities and assumptions in terms of determination of what the budget figure work is. That's discussed with colleagues in directorates, and it will be then taken, to cabinet as well. And it's an agreed way forward after taking account that the balance of risk. So we get the most robust position taken forward, and that, I'd like to think that's in the case. A lot of our sort of budgeted figures take account of that. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just a further comment, and might prompt some other answers. There's some departments that are continually missing the savings target, which would seem to suggest a level of optimism bias that would be in there then. Or are we saying these are completely other external factors? Because I'm looking at this report as a one-off, it would be hard to tell. So I don't know if that conversation has happened with Grant Thornton. It's maybe a position of Leeds fans to have a little bit more optimism bias in there. I don't know.
I think we need to be careful about scrutiny questions as well regarding budgets. But also, Victoria, would you like to come in?
Yeah, just on the process then. We do go through with each of the directorates around those proposals, and like I said, we go through and challenge them. And as part of that, we look at what's the worst case, best case scenarios. What we also do is monitoring them through the year, as I said, go to executive board and scrutiny. There are, and I think if you look on the past history, can I take children's and families out of this? But if you look at past history, they are delivering the savings proposals. What has happened in the last 18 months, I would say, within children's and families is external factors, which has meant that they haven't been able to deliver the savings that were proposed. Because, well, they've delivered some of the savings, but they haven't, the overspend has gone greater because of the demand that's come through, and that's been the issue. We haven't been able to go quick enough because of the demand. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any other further questions? No. Okay, thank you. Are we happy to receive this report and note that the recommendations that were made have that the recommendations that were given have been made? Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Can we move on to item 14, please?
Thank you, Chair. You have before you the updated draft report on our audit findings for 2021-22. So this updates the committee on changes since we presented the last report in July earlier this year. All the changes we've shown in blue for ease of following what's happened since. Probably 3 points I just want to bring to your attention. First of all, we're probably around 80% of the way through our work. Secondly, just to let you know that as alluded to earlier by Victoria, we are working together with the finance team to try and resolve the 21-22 audit as quickly as we are able. We do meet regularly every fortnight to talk through the issues that need to be moved forward and progress on that basis. The point in terms of working together has been already highlighted in the auditor's annual report. And I think the only final thing I just wanted to bring to your attention is that we've identified some additional amendments to the accounts. There is one change which is shown at one of the appendices, and there are some further adjustments which are to the disclosure items, again, all shown in blue. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Are there any questions? Thank you very much. Councillor Firth.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask I obviously talked about the previous recommendation in the previous item, to talk about the other one, which is in relation to the group account disclosure that was recommended at the beginning of last year. Is there any way we can provide an update from the finance team or others in terms of progress on that particular item more generally?
Councillor, yes, we're looking at expanding the group accounts disclosure in the final audited version of the 21-22 accounts.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any further questions? Nope, are we happy to receive the report and note its contents? Right, thank you very much. We're going to move on to item 15, which is the work programme, and Jonathan's going to take.
Okay, I'll take this report as read, and I know that a survey has recently gone out to members around the content of the work plan moving forward. So any comments or questions? Happy to move on.
Okay. Thank you very much. So that's it then. If there's any recommendations that anyone would like to have or like to see brought up into the work plan, please can you send me an email directly? That's it then. Thank you very much. Probably won't see you before until after Christmas. So have a nice Christmas and have, enjoy the holidays and that. And I'll see you in February, on Monday, the February the 5th in 2024. Thank you. Bye.